All right, so for this credit, we've spent a lot of time talking about the Industrial Revolution and some of the impacts of that, right? And I mentioned in the first lecture that this resulted in a lot of economic growth and it fueled population growth. That as factories started producing more and more goods that were distributed nationally for the first time, a lot of people were coming here for work opportunities because there were a lot of jobs created by these factories. But I also talked about how this ultimately impacted the American workforce. That as more people came in, um, the jobs that were available paid less. They were expected to work longer hours. I use the example of shoemaking, right? If you were a shoemaker before the Industrial Revolution, you made a pretty decent living. You got to work when and how you wanted. Um, and if there was an economic downturn, you still had those skills that you could rely on that would allow you to continue making a living for your family afterwards. And I talked about how all of this changes with industrialization, right? If there's an economic downturn, a factory could just lay off all their workers and there was no guarantee you were going to get hired back. And even if you did get hired back, you made significantly less money, you worked longer hours, right? So there were all these problems that came out of it. And then I talked about the progressive era, which is really um, the process of starting to fix some of those problems that come out of industrialization. So this is what you're going to do for your performance task is you are going to look at a single invention because a lot of times innovation solves problems, it fixes things and it makes things better in society, but it also brings with it unforeseen consequences. And so what you're going to be doing is you're going to be choosing an invention and it gives you a few up here on page 37. You aren't limited to those. You can choose any invention that you want, but you're going to give a basic overview of it, right? So who, what, when, where, why, how. In other words, what are the circumstances of this being created? And what issue was it meant to solve? What was the problem in society, right? Because if an invention doesn't solve a problem in society, what is its use? Why would it get invented in the first place, right? So what problem does it solve? What are the short-term and long-term positive benefits of this? So what good comes out of it, but also what are the short-term and long-term costs, the negative consequences of this invention? So how does it make things better? And then how does it make things worse in some respects? And then what ultimately is done to correct the negative consequences of this invention? And in some cases, there may be some negative consequences that still persist. For example, um, cars, right? There were some short-term consequences for the invention of the car in the sense that there were no traffic laws, there were no traffic lights. Um, Early cars shared the road with horses because horses were the primary means of transportation before the invention of the car, and cars scared horses. So when one would start up, all the horses in the area would get spooked, and this led to all kinds of dangerous problems. All of these are fixed in the short term, right? They start passing laws about traffic. They the traffic light gets invented. We end up getting all of these things to make driving safer, right? And these are short term consequences. But there are long term consequences, like the pollution generated by internal combustion engines, right? And so these negative consequences still persist. And this is very much still something that is being worked on in society, trying to find solutions to the problems presented by this, right? So if there are some negative consequences that still persist, what are some of the possible solutions? Um, Now, this can be a short essay or it can be a presentation. So you can do a Google Slides presentation, whichever comes more naturally to you. Um, Ultimately, as long as you answer these 5 questions, and question number 5 is only if there are negative consequences to this invention that still exist. Um, but as long as you hit all of these, you should be good and you will do fine on this. I hope this helps, and please let me know if you have any questions.